My name is Timbani Threadgill, and this is Timbo Talk. I'd like to thank you for joining us for our debut episode of Timbo Talk. As I mentioned, my name is Timbani Threadgill, and I'm a therapist by trade. Prior to my time as a therapist, I spent a long time in education. I worked as a paraprofessional, a behavior coach, taught for a couple of years at a charter school. And then I transitioned to the world of behavior health, where I was a case manager while I worked on my master's. Eventually got my master's degree in counseling, did my practicum work at the state prison, worked some emergency psychiatric work after that, and I've been working with geriatrics mostly for about the last 4 going on 5 years. There'll be another episode where I'll happily share more details about my background and my work history and answer questions and things of that nature. But for now, I just wanted to let you guys know a little bit about who I am. I call myself a helper by trade, and it really ties into why I started this podcast. I'm really hoping to continue to help people in some way, shape, or form. Now, the Tim Threadgill, or the Timbani Threadgill, who you may run into in a professional setting, is a whole lot different than Timbo. And so that's going to be a little bit different here on the pod. It's not going to be buttoned up Timbani. It's going to be Bo. So bear with me. If you're listening and you work with me in a professional setting, don't look at me any different. I may use some choice language from time to time. I may present a little bit differently than I do in the workplace. But the objectives remain the same. I'd like to help people. I would like to help address skills deficits. We're going to crack some jokes. We're going to tell some good stories. We'll have some fun guests on in the future. And we'll answer questions. We'll do some Ask Timbo episodes as well. And it should be a lot of fun. So I hope you'll stick with us on this journey. And I hope that you enjoy this debut episode. So I wanted to start the pod with a topic that I thought is important, but that I haven't really heard spoken about enough. And that is specifically the way that we perceive our problems. I think the way that we perceive our problems definitely impacts the way that we work through them. And a great story comes to mind that I'll share to kind of contextualize this a little bit more. So one of my favorite, most impactful memories that I have working as a therapist was when I was at the state prison. I did my practicum work there, which is pretty much the last part of my master's program. So for me, that looked like being at the prison for 10 hours a day, 1 day a week for about 8 months. So I did my practicum at Lewis State Prison and really enjoyed it, learned a lot. As I briefly mentioned, the majority of my professional career in education specifically, obviously I worked with children and even in behavior health. I worked with kids a lot. So when I was working on my master's, a big piece of it for me when we got to the practicum was to get as far away from my comfort zone as I could. I was very, very comfortable working with children. And so for me, I wanted to get as far away from that as I could. I had a really great professor while I was doing my master's in counseling, and he was a psychologist at the state prison. So he wraps up a class one day and says, listen, just so you guys know, we got practicum work at the prison. If you're looking for a practicum site, this is my phone number. This is my email address. When you guys get there, give me a shout. So I did. Reached out to him, shared I was really interested in doing my practicum at the prison. Came down there. Well, first he insisted, why don't you come down and check it out? Pick a day. You can come around. I'll show you around. And if you're still interested, then sure, we can do your practicum here. And I remember I went down there and, he took me around and it was prison art. Brothers was in orange jumpsuits and all that. So he took me around and we spent a couple hours there. And after we went to a couple different yards and walked around, we ended up back in his office and he looked at me and he was like, so you still want to do it? And I looked at him, I was like, yeah, what you thought was some kind of bitch or something? So we got a little chuckle out of that. And I ended up doing my practicum there. So one of the first things that I kind of got tasked with when I was comfortable to do things on my own was checking up on our 805ers. And the 805 process is what they call it when an inmate wants to go into protective custody. And there are various reasons why an inmate may want to go into protective custody. Oftentimes when inmates came onto the yard with a more frowned upon offense, violent offenses against women and children, sexual offenders, things of that nature, they would get bounced off the yard immediately. So somebody would say, give us your papers. And if you didn't have your papers, you got beat down and kicked off the yard anyways. Or they would say, give us your papers. They'd give your papers to whoever asked for them. And they would say, okay, no violent offenses against women or children. You could stay on this yard. If you had a sexual offense or violent offense against a woman or a child, you're out of there. So that's how a lot of cats ended up needing to go into 805. There was also a decent amount of individuals who just ran up drug debts. There were also individuals who had, beefs for various reasons with individuals on the streets, kind of spilled into the prison when they ended up there with, individuals that had interacted with in the community, so various reasons. Obviously, as the mental health professional at the prison, it was important that we checked in on the mental health of these inmates who were asking for protective custody. So they were all housed on the same yard, and I would go in with the list of everybody who came in, and I would go and touch bases with them. And what this looked like was me literally leaning up against the cell door, and I would knock on the door. Doom, doom, doom. Hey, Johnson. You Johnson? And this is Arizona, and it was summer, so it was usually really dark in those cells. But I could see through a clear window in the middle of the door, and usually Johnson would walk up. Yeah, I'm Johnson. And I say, hey, Johnson, I'm Tim. I'm with mental health. I'm just checking up on you. Are you okay? Is there anything you need to talk about? And like clockwork, almost always, they'd be like, I'm good. Everything's cool. Can you bring me some word searches, or can you bring me some Sudokus? Or, hey, can you ask the CEO if he could bring me an extra peanut butter jelly sandwich? It was rarely a legitimate mental health need. If they had a need, if they needed to talk, then I would radio down to the CO. The CO would come up. They would put the inmate in handcuffs, and they would escort the inmate along with me over to an office where we would meet for an individual session. And it was, all kinds of things that would come up. So I'm going through the 805s one day, and I'm going through my list, and they came my way around. And at this time, man, I've been at the prison for a couple months, so I walked on the unit, and I had a whole thick, copies of word searches and Sudokus. And, hey, Johnson, you good? Yeah, I'm good. Can I get some word search? I didn't have to come back. I'll just drop down and slide a couple right into their cell door. Thanks, Threadgill. Keep it pushing. So I come across this cell, and I meet this individual, and I call out his name, and I ask if he's okay. And I see him, and he's sitting on his bed. He's got some bruises on him, and he looks like he's been crying. His eyes are red. He just looks dejected. So I asked him to come over, and I'm like, hey, man, you okay? I'm Tim. I'm Threadgill. I'm with mental health. I'm just checking on you. Are you good? He just kind of nodded his head. So after a while, I just called the CO. I said, hey, can you come get this inmate out? I pulled him out, and we met for several months, and it was very informative for me. It was one of the first individuals that I met for therapy with, and one of the first individuals I interacted in a therapeutic fashion with that wasn't like an adolescent. So it's much different for me, and it was very informative, great learning opportunity. So we meet, and he tells me in that first session that he got beat up the night before, and he got kicked out of the Aryan Brotherhood. He explains that he was accused of selling a weapon to a member of another race, and this was a big no-no with the Aryan Brotherhood cats. They didn't like that. So they beat the dude down, kicked him off the yard. He ended up in 805. And so he explained that this had happened, early that morning, really. So I'm meeting with this individual within 12 hours of this thing happening. In that first session, he really discussed a lot of his history. Kind of explained that when he had initially come into prison, he wasn't supposed to be there before a couple of years. Got in with the Aryan Brotherhood cats, and, did a bunch of various things that ended up adding on to his time. By the time we met, he told me that he had pretty much committed his life to the Aryan Brotherhood. He was going to be in jail for a total of 10 years, and he didn't really see a time in which he'd get out. He just kind of was like, I'm going to do this for life, and kind of raise up the ranks of the Aryan Brotherhood, and this is the life he knew. He got incarcerated when he was 19 years old, so very young man, didn't really have a whole lot to look forward to after prison, so he was kind of committed to this. So he's sharing his history with me, and he's bruised and, just dejected. And he was explaining to me how the most frustrating part for him was that he never even got an opportunity to defend himself. He was accused of this thing, and he pretty much got beat down. And he swore adamantly he hadn't sold a weapon to anybody. So we talked and we talked and we talked. Well, more he talked than I listened. And I just remember I'll never forget the look on his face. And he had tears in his eyes, and he said, I just feel so stupid. I've wasted so much time. And when he said that, I said, yeah, but, it looks like you're opening your eyes now. So what happens from here is really up to you. And the way that you look at it is really going to determine the way that you process through this. I came up with this analogy. I said, kind of like when you're driving, man, you got to decide if this is a pothole, if this is a detour, or if this is a roadblock. Say, man, you ever driven? Yes, I've driven. Okay, when you're driving and you come across a pothole, does that stop you from getting to your destination? Do you even slow down? He's like, no, not really. Just kind of keep it pushing. I said, okay. That's one way to perceive and look at our problems. You ever been driving and come across a detour? Yes, I have. Okay, so when you come across a detour, what happens? Well, you got to figure out a different way to get to your destination because the road is closed or whatever it is. I said, okay. Again, that does not stop you from getting to your destination. Finally, you ever come across a roadblock? He says, yes, I have. I said, what does that look like? Well, it depends. Sometimes it's temporary road closure. You got to wait it out. Sometimes it's, closed for good. You got to figure out another way. And I said, okay, but again, does this stop you from continuing on your journey? He said it might slow you down, but it does not stop you. Okay. That is the same exact way that we should try and perceive our problems. Can we categorize these problems as either a pothole, a detour, or roadblock, with an emphasis on the point that, again, this does not stop your journey. This does not stop you from getting to your destination. It's just a delay, maybe. Or maybe it's not. Maybe it's just a pothole. Okay. So we talked about this. And that was really the thought that I left him with. You got to decide, what kind of problem is this? How are we going to work through this? How are we going to bounce back from this? And it was great. It was a really good session. He was very emotionally raw. He was very honest. He was in a vulnerable space. So he was just open. He just talked. I just listened. So we met for months. Met with him every Wednesday for the next 3-4 months, however long it was until the situation was resolved. I remember the next time we met, I said, how you feeling? What's going on? And he was in a better space. And he had really kind of moved on from what happened. And he shared with me, yeah, I decided that I see this as a detour for the rest of my life. And he explained that for the first time in many, many years, he was thinking about what was going to happen after prison. He no longer thought to himself, when I get close to getting out of here, I'll just do something else to get some more time. He was thinking about what life on the outside would be like and the things that he wanted to pursue. And he explained that this is one of the best things that's probably ever happened to him, because although he wasted a lot of time, he didn't have to waste any more time, and his eyes were open. So he explained that he saw this as a detour, and he was going to change the way that he was living his life, and that once he got out of prison, he'd have his whole life to live. And that's the moral of the story. No, that's not the end of the story. I'm joking. But it was a profound moment for me as a therapist, and I believe for him as well. And we had a great conversation about that. And so our emphasis and our focus after that was all about how we perceived this whole ordeal of getting kicked out of the Aryan Brotherhood and going into the 805 process and potentially leaving Lewis State Prison and going somewhere else, or going to a protective custody yard, and what that might look like. And we talked about all these scenarios and how he was going to keep himself out of trouble. And his goal at that point was ensuring that he didn't get any more trouble, that he didn't get any more time added on. I remember in one of the sessions we had, we talked about futures planning. And I said, okay, well, let's talk about the future and what you want to do and how that is going to work. So we meet and we talk about things. And I remember one session, he had this big shit-eating grin on his face, and he was all happy. And he's like, yo, Threadgill, been thinking. I'm like, what's up, man? He's like, I figured out what I'm going to do when I get out of here. I said, okay, what are you going to do? And he goes, I'm going to be a hairdresser. And I looked at him and I said, okay, how did you come to that conclusion? And he said, well, I was thinking, Threadgill, it's not a lot of women in here, and I want to be around some women. And what do women like to do? Get their hair done. So I'm going to give you a hairdresser. And he was that ass serious. But hey, thought process was sound. That's your goal. That's what you want to do. I will support that. Let's do that. Let's move forward with that plan. And so we had all kinds of great discussions. And the way that we move through the discussions, the way that his mindset shifted, the way that he perceived things shifted was so fun for me to see. Every week when we met, his hair would be a little bit longer, a little bit longer, a little bit longer, a little bit longer. And finally, by the time we stopped meeting, he had a full head of hair, which was drastically different from, being a skinhead when I first met him. So it was cool to see the transformation in his physical look as well as just his thought process and the way that he was looking at things. So again, just to kind of wrap this up, the way that we perceive our problems significantly impacts the way that we work through them. There are some people in your life that maybe catastrophize a little bit. Maybe they see everything as a roadblock. Everything stops their progress. Everything stops everything. I have to stop, figure out something new. Stop. Right? And that's okay. You can work through that. There are also other people in your life who are probably very optimistic. And these crazy, gnarly things happen to them. And no matter what, it's just a pothole. Doesn't seem to be a big deal. Seems to be something that they could just kind of work through and move through. And that's great. I would argue that we should work to move as much as we can towards perceiving our problems as potholes. That's the more adaptable way to look at them. And that is going to put us in the best position to work through them efficiently and effectively. Okay? Pothole does not mean that the journey is over. It just means that the ride isn't smooth. Okay, that's good. We can waste energy fighting the fact and boo-hooing about the fact that the journey of the road isn't what we expected. It's not as smooth as we expected. That's a waste of time. All right, that's just how it goes sometimes. We'll be okay. All right. When we accept the reality of a detour, we can start mapping a new route. We can start figuring out how we go about handling our business and still moving forward with our goal. Okay. Perception drives response. Seeing a problem as a catastrophe versus a challenge produces different choices, different potential outcomes, and the energy that we put into them is different. Okay. Some roads are closed for safety. It might feel unfair, but redirection can protect us or offer better paths in time. It doesn't mean, again, that the journey is over. It just means that it's stopped for a while. So as we move forward, a couple of strategies for reframing our thoughts. When you find yourself in these moments when you're asking yourself, is this a pothole? Is this a detour? Is this a roadblock? Ask yourself, what is this moment trying to teach me? What can I learn from this moment? Okay. Work to shift from why me thinking to what now thinking. How can we be productive and work towards finding a resolution? Okay. Pay attention and verbally name out what variables are in your control and what are not. Focus on the things that are in your control. All right. If you can, look at past examples of detours that led to growth. Okay. For me, I have found that the most growth, the biggest areas of growth have always been on the heels of a really difficult trial or bad news or something not going so well. So there's great learning opportunities in those spaces. And give yourself permission to feel stuck. Okay, it's all right. Sometimes we got to come up with a new plan. Sometimes we got to think through something a little bit differently. And that can take some time. That's okay. So don't freak out about that. Give yourself permission to feel stuck, but don't stay stuck. Okay, move through that too. Ask yourself if you're dealing with a current challenge. Am I staring at a pothole and calling it the end? Or am I open to a different way forward? Okay, you may not control the road conditions, but you do control how you drive through them. The power is in the way that we perceive these things. I'm so appreciative of you deciding to spend a little bit of time with me here today. Please like, please share, please subscribe. Please share with your friends if you found this informative. Pay attention to the way that you perceive things. Pay attention to your thought process. There'll be many more topics that are covered on the podcast. I hope that they are informative. Oh, and to wrap up the story, that I told about the inmate that I met with for therapy. He did get 805. He was transferred to another prison. I popped in one Wednesday to see him, and we all kind of know with the 805s, if at least for me, I was only there on Wednesdays. If they get granted 805, is highly unlikely that I'll see them once that is granted. So I looked into it. My supervisor told me he did get 805. He was transferred to another prison. So I can only hope that he maintains success and is somewhere doing a whole bunch of women's hair right now. So yeah, thank you for joining us today. I'm most appreciative of you deciding to spend a little time with us today. Please like, please share, please subscribe. I hope that this was fun, and I hope that you will tune in next time. This is Timbo Talk.